Hello everyone, I'm Khadija Mukrim and I'm UM6P student. Today we're here in a special program of the UM6P studio where we're covering the third edition of the Science Week. Today we're pleased to have among us Dr. Stewart Kauffman. And before we start the 4 questions we've prepared for you, sir, we'd like to know more about you and about your research field.
Well, by now I'm a very old man at 83, and I have done work in many areas. I'm a medical doctor, and I worked on cancer and biotechnology areas, but also on areas like the origin of life and how genes regulate one another, and issues in physics and in economics. It's a lot of areas.
So can you tell us about your research and how it relates to the theme of complexity at this year's Science Week?
Well, I'm old enough to have been one of the early inventors of what's now called complexity. I was pretty young, I was 23, and at that time we began to know that, there's DNA, RNA, and proteins, there are genes, and Jacob and Monod discovered that one gene could make a protein that turned another gene off. And that meant that genes could turn one another on and off like light bulbs, and that meant there was some big network among the genes that controlled gene activities in cells. So I made the first models of thousands of genes turning one another on and off to try to understand what cell types are and how you start from the fertilized egg to get to you or to cancer or so on. So that was that was one of the early areas of complexity, and I was at a place called the Santa Fe Institute for a while doing that.
So you've talked about one of your, I think, exciting discoveries about these specific genes and so on. So can you choose one complex concept and maybe explain it in simple words to our audience?
It has to do what living things are. So your audience and the students may know about chemical catalysis. A catalyst speeds up the rate of a chemical reaction. More precisely, it speeds up the approach to chemical equilibrium. And your body is full of enzymes that do that when you eat dinner. So I invented many years ago, in 1971, the idea that a system could be a set of molecules that reproduce if each molecule catalyzed a reaction, making one of the molecules in the set. So I might catalyze a reaction, makes a second copy out of you, of 2 of the parts of you, and you might make a molecule that catalyzes the formation of one of the other people out of 2 parts of them, and they of me. So each of us would speed up the creation of all of us around the circle, and that's called a collectively autocatalytic set. And it's a main idea. And in the last few years, a wonderful woman named Joanna Xavier, who's Portuguese, has shown that if you look at all of the prokaryotes, 6,700 prokaryotes that have bacteria and archaea, they all have these autocatalytic sets, and they're just little molecules. There's no polymers, there's no DNA, and there's no RNA, and there's no protein. It's now very likely that life arose in the universe by the formation of small molecule collectively autocatalytic sets. And it's just huge. It says that life may well be naturally emergent in the universe.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really amazing. So during your research and your career, how do you think that interdisciplinary collaboration has an important role in overcoming complexity in the scientific research and innovation?
It does. There's very good evidence that when you have people from different fields and they talk to one another, because they know different things, they can cross boundaries that wouldn't happen otherwise, and they can innovate in new ways. So it really can work, and it often does. The problem, and there's a danger, that when you're doing something that's interdisciplinary, the criteria of doing it well aren't clear. So how do you know you're not just all doing something kind of stupid? And so the way you do that is it helps to get a bunch of really smart people doing it, and then begin to find ways to check what you're doing against something in the outside world. It can be very powerful, but it can also be a complete waste because you haven't been careful. You know the game of tennis, yeah? It's French. Well, if you play tennis with the net down, you're not playing tennis. So doing science without knowing what the truth is can be useless, but done well is superb.
So maybe interdisciplinarity has something to do with a philosophical perspective. So how do you think that the ethical and the philosophical consideration had an impact on complexity nowadays?
We need the notion of doing it well. And you're all here in Africa. Complexity science is moving towards being able to think about living on this planet, doing it well, without destroying the biosphere. So there's a notion of emergence in complexity that's becoming recognized. Part of that emergence is that we are destroying the biosphere while we're trying to make livings. We're driving income up and lifting people out of poverty. Complexity theory is almost ready to confront the issue of how do we do that on a finite planet ethically, in the deepest sense of ethics. Life emerged 4 billion years ago, and we are destroying the accumulated wisdom of an evolving biosphere because we're producing more skyscrapers that we don't need. It is actually your generation, because you're younger than me, and I find myself wondering, the World Economic Forum was just here, talking about empowerment of women.
So I think it was a deep answer for a deep question, and it's really inspiring for maybe larger topics to discuss later. So last but not least, Sir, Dr. Stewart, how do you think that the study of complexity may evolve in the future and its potential impact on the scientific research and innovation?
In particular, I think it's going to evolve to understand that we cannot deduce the biosphere and what it will become. That's beyond current complexity theory, which wishes to mathematize everything. I may be nearly alone in thinking this, but in fact, we will begin to understand how an evolving biosphere, without our being able to say what it will do, keeps creating ways in which creatures get to exist with one another, and the global economy is doing the same thing by making ever new business opportunities. We don't even know how to think about it. So the sciences of complexity are on the edge of saying, that's an amazing problem, and it's an amazingly new way of understanding how we are in the world, and we're right on the edge of it. It's a third transition in science, and complexity science is just beginning to see there's something there. It's huge.
Exactly, sir. Thank you so much for your generosity. Welcome to the UM6P, and we're really glad to have you with us today. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, and see you in another session.